Let's bring in Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor and former House Speaker. Good morning to you, Mr. Gingrich.
Good morning.
Good morning. What's your reaction when you hear those words that Griff is talking about and those images?
Well, look, I think you're getting exactly what the policy suggests you'll get. President Biden has sent a clear signal to the world that the United States is open for illegal immigration. Gallup once estimated that there were at least 65 million people who would like to come to the United States. The numbers are just going to keep going up. The system will become unsustainable. By sometime, probably this summer, we'll be back where we were under President Obama. We'll have tens of thousands of children wandering around. You'll have the cartels getting paid. For them, there are at least two cartels that have basically given up drugs for people because they make more money moving people into the U.S. than they make moving drugs into the U.S. So I think this is a track. If you want to make sure that the American system breaks down and that we are ultimately faced with so many people you can't possibly manage it, this is a terrific strategy. But we shouldn't be surprised. We are getting exactly what this kind of policy delivers.
Yeah, you talk about what the Mexican cartels are getting. We even have rates. Maybe there's a rate card out there. U.S. Border Patrol says that if you bring one person across, it's $3,250. African travelers, $20,000. Asians will pay more. The evaluation set out concerns that there'll be significant influx of migrants. They expect Caribbean, Asians, and Middle Easterns to be there this spring and the summer. But it's not just about Republicans and Democrats, Joe Biden and President Obama. How about Mexican President Manuel Lopez, Obrador, who said this to Reuters? They see him, meaning Biden, as the migrant president. And so many feel they're going to reach the United States. Mexico says this is a crisis. They want it addressed. How long can he walk away from this and pretend that it's not a five-alarm fire?
Well, when you're dealing with a president who forgets the name of his Secretary of Defense and forgets the name of the Pentagon, he could probably, I don't know that he walks away, he could probably sit away forever. Why would any of this affect him? He'll say, oh, gee, I guess that's probably a problem. And I think we really underestimate the degree to which he's detached from reality and the degree to which people will later on look back and say, gosh, there were terrible consequences. Why didn't we know better? Well, we did know better, but we adopted a policy deliberately that sends a signal, everywhere in the world, whether they're watching Fox and Friends or they're just talking to themselves, people gossip and they learn. And everywhere in the world right now, the signal's out that the U.S. has a welcome mat, that President Biden would love for you to come stay, and the economic opportunities in America, despite everything, are still so much better than in most of the world. You can't blame a father or a mother who wants their child to grow up here rather than in poverty. But you can blame the American government for not being honest about the costs. This is going to be extraordinarily expensive. It's going to shake, I think, the fabric of American society. And my guess is that in 4 years of the Harris-Biden administration, that you are going to actually see enormous influx, probably in the neighborhood of 6 to 15 million people.
Speaking of costly, yesterday the House passed a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. It sounds like Joe Biden's going to be signing it tomorrow. There will be a big, a big celebration and things like that. But, what happened to the unity? We heard Joe Biden talk about, I want everybody to be together and we're going to go forward. We're not going to do all that party line stuff. So far, everything they've done, Mr. Speaker, is party line. And it's not like Joe Biden's running the party. It's Nancy and Chuck are telling Joe what to do.
Well, and I think Kamala Harris. I really do think this is becoming the Harris-Biden administration. And you can tell that every time you see him in public. I mean, why would you think that he's dramatically better in private than he is when he can't take any questions in public? He can't remember what he's talking about. He can't remember his own nominees. My assumption is that he's a very minor force inside that building, and that the White House is increasingly run by Harris, Pelosi, and Schumer. And of course, look, these are hardline liberals. These are people who think that it's fine that Walmart, or rather that a major drugstore company is closing every single drugstore in San Francisco because they will no longer prosecute petty theft. And people have learned you can steal up to $950 and come back and a couple hours later, steal another $950. So you're literally watching the collapse of what you and I thought of as civilization. That's the world of Pelosi and Schumer and Harris. And they're happy to give it to the rest of us.
So there is a headline this morning about a New York City school. It's downtown. It's in NoHo, which is Nolita and Soho area. And it's called Grace Church School. Parents pay $57,000 a year to send their kids here. It's a very popular school.
What?
And they sent out a 12-page memo to all the students and to the parents saying you don't need to say certain words at home, including mom and dad. They now want you to say grown-up, folks, family, or guardian. They say don't ask anyone where you're from. You need to say what is your cultural or ethnic background. They don't want you to say Merry Christmas. They want you to say Happy Holidays or have a great break. Instead of boys and girls, guys, ladies, and gentlemen, you need to say people, folks, friends, readers, or mathematicians. What's your reaction?
Well, look, nobody's noticed it yet, but the House Democrats unanimously voted in the rules to eliminate mother, father, brother, sister. They took out 29 gender-specific names. When you look at these things, you have to realize you're dealing, for example, with a bill which is essentially the Gay and Transsexual Supremacy Act, which basically says you can practice your religion as long as you don't offend anybody, but it'll be illegal if you offend anybody. And I think we're seeing a tremendous assault on the whole notion of whether there are males and females. You had the president signed an executive order that allows transsexual males to compete as though they're females, which we know guarantees the end of women's sports, because if you grow up through your teenage years, males simply are going to win most of the contests. We're in a period where the weirdest people, this will get me in trouble for saying it, but I think I'm old enough that I grew up in a different world. I grew up in a world where we recognized that there really were mother and father, and we thought it was a good idea to have a mother and a father. We thought it was a good idea to recognize boys and girls. You know, in California, there's a bill in the legislature that would make it illegal for a department store to have a boys section and a girls section. This is a madness. I recently did a podcast with Sad Gad, and he's amazing because he says basically we now have parasites in our brain that are cultural parasites, and the people are just literally crazy. And I think you're seeing examples of the craziness.
And let's move on. We can go on this forever, but sadly, it's coming from America and it's infecting the world. It's usually the opposite, and I'm embarrassed by it. Meanwhile, I'm not embarrassed about this. A 4-part look on Fox Nation about Rush Limbaugh, where he came from, the impact he made, and while he'll continue to resonate in the future, you saw it up close and personal. Your rise mimicked his rise. Here you are commenting on the Rush Limbaugh you knew.
Let me track my knowledge, my becoming aware of Newt Gingrich for you. It's the early 80s, and the Democrats and the media are just creaming Reagan every day. Personally, his ideas, his policies. And I'd go home when I had a night free and I'd watch C-SPAN. And there was this guy doing special orders. He and a couple of his associates were speaking to an empty House chamber, but as long as somebody was in there speaking, C-SPAN had to cover it. This guy was Ronald Reagan, Jr.
And it was Newt Gingrich. I had it backwards, Newt. What did it feel? Did you know that Rush was out there and that he was supporting you?
Well, look, Rush went national in 1988. He was a strong ally of ours. He was a big factor in our victory in 1994 with the contract with America. He and Reagan had an ability to use common language so the average person could understand it, to describe things that were so blatantly true that they both just sort of ran over their opponents with the sheer logic of their language. And Rush was a major force. I say prior to the rise of Fox News, he was probably the most important populist conservative force in the country. And we are a different country and a better country because of Rush Limbaugh.
You know, he was such a good explainer. He was a great entertainer and a broadcaster, but he would go into what other broadcasters would never in a million years talk about on the radio, and he'd talk about it for an hour, and by the end it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Well, I got a question for you, Newt. Who takes over for him? Because he is leaving a gigantic void in the world of broadcasting.
Well, I mean, I think Mark Stein probably has the inside track as a really interesting intellectual who's also very funny and very capable of doing it. He's been doing Rush's show for a good bit, as Rush was taking chemotherapy. And I certainly think he's a possibility. Nobody's going to replace Rush. I mean, Rush was a unique person. Probably the person who's come closest to replace him is Sean Hannity. If you look at Hannity does 3 hours of radio a day and then an hour of television at night. He has a huge audience. But even Sean would say that Rush had a unique set of abilities. You were exactly right. He understood he had to entertain you to get you to stay listening long enough that he could educate you. And as a result, he had a huge audience, and he was genuinely funny. I mean, there are not many people that have as good a sense of humor as Rush did. Reagan was another one, but Rush was probably funnier than Reagan and worked at being funny, understood that his real power was you liked listening to him. Not just you learned, but you liked. You had a personal relationship. And he had a personal relationship with about 23 million people. So a remarkable achievement.
I know. Yeah, they were all so sad. It was a sad day when he passed away. Many of them had listened to him for 32 years. Thank you so much, Newt.